Hi, I'm Tim Spector, lead scientist on the ZOE Health Study, and this is my colleague, Sarah Berry, chief scientist at ZOE. Welcome to our webinar on intermittent fasting, or IF, which doesn't mean if, but IF. During this webinar, we're going to respond to your questions you've been asking about intermittent fasting in our recent poll and tell you about our exciting new study just on this topic. Next month, we're launching a new ZOE Health Study that will test the benefits of intermittent fasting, and it's our first all at-home lifestyle study to test how small changes to your everyday behavior could potentially have a big positive impact on your health. Now, this unique study aims to be the largest IF study to date, looking at whether intermittent fasting works for individuals in the real world rather than in a very ultra-controlled, randomized controlled trial setting, which doesn't reflect real life. And we'll tell you a bit about the study, how you can get involved when it goes live in October, and then we'll dive straight into your questions about intermittent fasting. And Sarah's going to tell you more about the study itself. Sarah.
Thanks, Tim. So I think the first thing to say actually is that the study will be optional for everyone to join. So it's open to all ZOE Health Study members who have our app, but it's totally optional whether or not you want to take part in this. And what we're going to be doing is really myth busting what we know about intermittent fasting to find out through what's going to be this huge community study if there are health benefits or if there aren't health benefits for intermittent fasting. And most importantly, who will benefit and who might not benefit. So we're going to be focusing on a form of intermittent fasting, which is called time-restricted eating. And quite often we might refer to it when Tim and I are chatting today as TRE, which is short for time-restricted eating. And this is a form of intermittent fasting where you eat your normal meals, but over a shorter period of time, and then you fast. So it's not the form of intermittent fasting that some of you may have heard of, where you need to restrict your calorie intake, or you have, 1 day of restricted calorie intake and 2 days of normal eating. This is where every day you're just changing that period of time where you're actually consuming your food.
So it's not really a diet, is it, Sarah? Would you agree?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely.
I think that's really important for people to realize. This is not some form of calorie controlled diet like the previous ones, like the 5-2 diets and things like that we saw about 10 years ago, the fast diets and these things. That it's quite different.
Yeah, and I think, Tim, this is what's really exciting, because it's addressing this whole new area around nutrition that we now know is so important, which is moving beyond thinking about just the calories that you eat or just the food that you consume and how much you consume, but thinking about when you're consuming those calories. So it's this whole area that people might have heard of called chronobiology, but also thinking about the whole how we eat that I know we often talk about when we talk about our ZOE Predict research as well. So just a few bits of information of how this is going to work. So the study will last for a minimum of 3 weeks, but there is an option to extend for longer. The first week will be you doing what you would normally do, logging how you feel each day and your normal way in which you consume your foods. And then the last 2 weeks will you be actually doing this form of intermittent fasting, the time-restricted eating. And so what we're going to be asking you to do is, when you enter that 2-week period of time-restricted eating, is to eat your regular meals, but in a 10-hour window as your kind of maximum eating window. So this means that you'll be fasting for about 14 hours and consuming all of your foods in about 10 hours. So this means if you're having breakfast, say at 8 a.m. and you're taking part in the study, you'd aim to be having your dinner, so your last eating event of the day, by 6 p.m. So it's all in this 10-hour window. Now, you can choose how you want to do this. You can do what's called early time-restricted eating, or you can do late time-restricted eating, or you can change day to day, or you can do middle of the day time-restricted eating. So you could choose, for example, to do a late eating window, starting your first meal at 12 p.m, so midday, and having your last meal at 10 p.m. But then you wouldn't eat anything, for the rest of that evening or in the morning. So this means
that suits me, Sarah. That's what I do, but I know it wouldn't suit you.
I don't think any restricted eating would suit me. But I think the whole point, Tim, is that people choose a window that works for them. The whole point is to find you know, is it earlier in the day, middle of the day, or later in the day? Because a lot of the published studies out there are really prescriptive in how they tell people to practice time restricted eating. But we're all different. Like you say, you know, you can really easily go without breakfast, but I know other people that would really struggle going without breakfast, but could happily not eat, you know, from 4 p.m, for example.
Yeah.
Something else just to note on the practical side is that when you are fasting, that means that you're not eating anything. You're not having any snacks, for example. And during each day, what we're going to ask you to do is log your mood, your hunger levels, and your energy levels. And you're going to do this every day in the app. At the end of the study, we're going to be able to play back to you your data. So we're going to be able to show you how these metrics, how your mood, your hunger, and your energy changed over this 2-week period, but also how it compared to when you were having your normal eating patterns, which is in that first week before you start your 2-week period. And so by participating in this study, you're going to get greater insights into what works for your body. We're going to give you these personalized data insights. But most importantly and most excitingly, I think for Tim and I, we're going to be able to, for the first time, understand a lot more about time restricted eating than we currently know from published research out there.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because no one's done a study like this before in the real world. And I think this allows not only us to inform a whole scientific community about this and see if this is a viable population approach to eating, but also it's going to tell you as individuals how well it suits you and your lifestyle. Is this really possible? But you know, I've definitely found it helpful for me. And just so you know, you can get through with things like black coffee and black tea water and things. You don't have to completely starve yourself in this diet. So it's not quite as difficult as some people might think. So we think that the vast majority of people should be able to do this. And in a way, a lot of the study is to see, well, how well does the average person do it? You know, even if you're not sure you're going to make it, do start the study, because in a way that's just as important to give it a go. And you know, failure is also useful for our data points. So I think we think a lot of people are going to benefit from this, learning about themselves and about this whole approach about when to eat best that suits their body. So
and I think, Tim, something just to add to that is that there's so much published research around time restricted eating where it's conducted in a really tightly controlled, what we call a metabolic setting, so really tightly controlled clinical trial. But actually, when people are left free living to do time restricted eating, we don't actually see the same results that they see from those studies. But a lot of those free living studies, people are still told really specific details of how they're meant to do it. So this is actually going to be the first study where we can look in that free living setting, where it's all about you doing it at home, how it works for you, how it fits within your lifestyle. And so that's why I think that's what's really particularly interesting to see the factors that you've said. You know, is it feasible for you? You know, do we find more people prefer early versus late? All of this is really important, I think, for this.
Yeah, and it's not just about you; it's about your family. You know, if you've got young kids, your spouse, you know, gets very upset. You know, all these kind of things that you want to go out some nights. It's about how can you work this into your everyday life without making your life a misery. And I think this is what we want to find out as well. So it's real world nutrition is what we're trying to get out there. And if it works, you know, we hope that millions of people will do this and could save the country a fortune at a time when we really need it. Okay, so let's go on to some questions, Sarah, shall we? These are the top voted questions that you guys shared with us on IF from the Slido poll. And we've had a few around what are the potential benefits. So you can start this off, Sarah. What are the benefits of fasting if you're not looking to lose weight? What else can people expect if all goes well?
Okay, so I think actually the data out there shows that most of the benefits of time restricted eating are seen independent of weight loss. So actually, time restricted eating doesn't have a huge impact on weight loss. Where we see the biggest benefits is around a lot of the other health health outcomes. So there's some really good evidence to show that time-restricted eating improves insulin sensitivity. It improves your blood sugar, so your blood glucose control. It improves blood pressure. It improves inflammation, oxidative stress. There's also some evidence emerging that it might improve the composition of your microbiome, and also it might improve your sleep. What we're particularly interested in seeing is whether it improves your energy, your fatigue, your mood, because there's some data out there showing that it might improve that, but we don't know for sure. And I think that's what's really exciting that we can get from this. But I think it's really important to say to people that, you know, yes, some people lose weight practicing intermittent fasting, but actually the main benefits are in all of these health outcomes that I just mentioned.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the studies have been done in conjunction with the calorie restricted diet rather than on its own, and therefore they might have underestimated the benefits of fasting. We simply don't really know. There haven't been really big ones that haven't done calorie restriction at the same time.
Yeah, so, and Tim, what we see as well is that for people that are left free living to practice time restricted eating, they do unintentionally reduce their energy intake. So the studies show they reduce it by about 300 calories. And what we've actually seen from our ZOE Predict studies is where we look at people who have long eating windows and a short fasting period versus those that have short eating windows and a long fasting period. We also see differences in a lot of these health measures that I just said. We see quite big differences in cardiovascular disease risk, in glucose control, but interestingly as well, we see differences in the energy intake. So we see that, again, this is in a free living setting. Those that have a longer eating window consume about 200 calories more on average compared to someone that has just a 2-hour difference in eating window.
And this can be a very simple cultural change, can't it? That, you know, everyone could actually do. It's not like it's a major change to many people's lives. So yeah, it'd be fascinating to see if this study does prove those same benefits, and trying to work out who benefits and who does. You know, there might still be some people that don't benefit, and I think we need to find that out and keep an open mind on this. Okay, so next question is, what's the research saying about the best fast length of time to fast? You know, because there are some rather extreme examples out there of people, you know, fasting for like 20 hours and only eating in 4 hours. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I know I would be very hungry for 20 hours if I was doing that. So I think the evidence shows that about 8 to 10 hours is the optimal period. That the benefits going anything less than 8 hours are quite small.
We're talking about eating windows here, not.
Yes, yeah. I'm talking about eating windows. So if we're saying 8 to 10 hours, that's the same as 16 to 14 hours fasted. So what we're suggesting people opt for is a 10-hour eating window and a 14-hour fast window. We think that this is more practical to achieve. Typically in the UK and the US, we know that people have a fasting and eating window of 12 hours on, 12 hours off, so to say. So for the majority of people, this is actually just reducing their eating window by 2 hours and extending their fasting window by 2 hours. If you want to go a bit longer than this, you can. But again, the kind of thing that we want to look at is how feasible is this for you within your own kind of social cultural setting. And so, you know, many of you, I assume, will still want to have your evening dinner with your family, etc. So what we don't want this to do is to actually impact how you live your life too much.
Yeah. And a few people have asked, you know, are there really good quality peer-reviewed papers on doing intermittent, this type of time-restricted eating in humans? And any particular, can anything go wrong? Is there any adverse, you know, side effect to this?
So there's actually hundreds of studies that have been published. And when I was looking this morning before doing this podcast, I was actually surprised just how many studies are out there. And there's studies looking at all different types of eating windows and also particularly focusing on this early versus late. But like you said earlier on, Tim, a lot of these studies are also in conjunction with energy restriction. So a lot of the studies on time restricted eating are studies where they've also asked people to restrict their calorie intake, which is what we're not asking for you to do in this study. I think, as I said at the beginning, the evidence is fairly robust to show that it does improve measures of glucose control, blood pressure, and inflammation. I think what the evidence is also showing is that there seems to be a greater benefit of people practicing early time restricted eating compared to late time restricted eating. So this is people consuming their meals earlier in the day and finishing earlier in the day compared to those doing what you would like to do perhaps, Tim, which is start at midday and finish.
But the caveat I would say to that is the numbers are very small.
Yeah.
The biggest study is about 90 people, I think, of all the studies. So there are many of them, but they're all pretty, they're small scale, usually less than 100. And I don't think they've looked, most of them involve younger people as well, haven't they? So I don't think they've got the full range of ages that we're trying to include here. So what's true for someone age 30 may be completely different for someone in their 60s. I think that's my view of that.
And I think as well, a lot of the studies are in people that are overweight, obese, or have type 2 diabetes or poor insulin control. And very few studies, like I said earlier, have actually looked at metrics that we want to study, which is, your energy, your hunger, your mood, for example. And so this is what will be really novel with the research we're doing here.
Okay, the last question on this topic is, do you need to do this every day in order to get any health benefits? And before you answer, I should say, I don't do this every day, but I still do it. And what does the data show us, Sarah?
I don't actually think anyone's looked at this, because I think most time restricted eating protocols are such that you should do it every day, which is why it's different to the other intermittent fasting studies, like the 5-2 studies. So yeah, I don't know. And I think it's something, again, I would encourage people to try and do whatever works for them. And I think,
we're hoping that if you can do it 5 or 6 days a week, it should be nearly as good, because everyone has to enjoy life. And if you get offered a free banquet or something, then you may have to take it up. But yeah, well, I think it's part of the experiment, really.
Yeah, I think any way of eating that does not fit with how you live your life and it's not pleasurable isn't worth doing. So I think if
it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable over years, which is what we're trying to see what suits people and what doesn't. Okay. What about risks? There was some rumor going around that women don't benefit, and it could be harmful. Is there any data you found on that?
I haven't found any data myself to show that it's any less effective in women versus men. I think that there aren't studies that have compared men versus women because they're small scale studies. And I think actually a lot of the studies have quite low numbers of women. So I think this is a really good opportunity for us, Tim, to actually capture data on women, which is where it's lacking.
Is that because women have periods and on HRT and menopause, and they're sort of seen to be more complicated metabolically, that they don't get into these studies?
Well, probably. I mean, I can tell you from my own experience of running many randomized controlled trials over the years, I've only ever recruited men. And that's because if I recruit women to my studies, I have to recruit 3 times as many women to take account of whether they're peri, postmenopausal, or what stage they are at their menstrual cycle. And sadly, I'm not given enough budget from funding bodies to do that. So this is why women are understudied.
This is why this is a great study, because we've got more women than men, I believe, on the ZOE Health Study. So this is a perfect way to see what's going on. Any risks at all? Anyone who shouldn't be doing this, do you think?
I think in terms of females, I think for women that are pregnant or breastfeeding, I think that the evidence shows it can be safe, but you need to be careful about not shortening your eating window too much. And my advice is to speak to your healthcare practitioner if you are pregnant or breastfeeding.
It's diabetics more than anything, isn't it? That we do where there's a.
Yeah, I mean, the evidence shows actually, Tim, that for people that have type 2 diabetes, there is a really great benefit from time restricted eating. I think that if you're type 1 diabetic, then I think this is where you need to be careful, and where we would advise you, to check with your healthcare practitioner if it is safe for you to do this. But I think the key thing is listen to how you feel. If it's not working for you, if you are feeling, shaky, having low sugars, etc., even if you are healthy and non-diabetic, then I think you need to think of a different way of doing it.
Okay, we've got a question which I can probably take is about whether skipping breakfast is actually healthy. So if you go for the late eating window, as I do, you either skip or you delay your breakfast. Is this harmful? Well, I looked into this when writing my book Spoon-Fed and didn't find any real data to show that it was harmful, and that on average people slightly benefit. I mean, obviously there's individual differences, so I don't think there's any real harm in this, but obviously, you've got to listen to your own body, and there's no absolutes in nutrition, but on average it's not harmful. And many countries around the world don't have breakfast, and we think about a third of people in Europe actually don't have breakfast apart from an espresso and a cigarette. So I'm not saying we should have cigarettes, by the way, but and in general, you can have a black coffee or black tea as your breakfast, because that we don't believe, changes the signaling to the brain. Okay, I think we've, and the idea is that really you don't have to skip breakfast. You could just have a late breakfast close to your lunch. I like breakfast, so sometimes I have my yogurt, my fruits, my nuts at sort of 12 o'clock, and then merge that in with a lunch just a couple of hours later. Okay, let's move on to other questions. How can you best fit in exercise with IF, Sarah?
I think this is one that's really down to personal preference. There is actually some really interesting research from one of our collaborators, Javier Gonzalez, who's been looking at timing of exercise around timing of eating. And he's found that if you exercise fasted, so before you've had breakfast, for example, that it seems to have greater impact on your metabolic health than if you exercise in the fed state. And this seems to be even more pronounced for females, showing again that level of personalization that we're particularly interested in. But my advice would be exercise as and how it works for you around your own eating patterns.
Yeah, and listen to your body as well. So, try both, see which one feels better for you, which one might make you feel hungrier or less hungry afterwards. These are the sort of signals we need to be all thinking about, realizing there are no hard and fast rules on this. It's all about individuality, personalization, and people being sensible. Okay, so next ones are about some things we've mentioned a little bit about this. What can you have to not break a fast? So we've talked about, you can obviously have water, you can have black tea, which means any tea really without, there's green teas as well. Can you have mint tea? These herbal teas, are they all right, Sarah, if there's no sugar in them?
I think if there's no other, sugar, milk in them, there's these terms that I heard recently, Tim, I don't know if you've heard of them, that I think are quite funny, called the clean fast and the dirty fast. Have you heard of them?
Yeah.
And that's around exactly what we're discussing here, that you do the clean fast and you don't have any tea or coffee, you have nothing except water. Or you can kind of do the dirty fast way, which is to keep you going, like you'd said earlier, you can have a black tea, a black coffee, and a herbal tea. So I think, again, do it the clean or dirty way, whichever works for you is my advice.
And I've heard of some people who say, well, I'll do this, but I'll only do it if I can have a single drop of milk in my coffee, because I really don't like it black. And they're asking me, is one drop of milk okay? And the answer is simply, we don't know. There is no data on this. Generally, if there's virtually no calories in it and your body isn't going to pick up that signal, or your gut microbes are unlikely to have a signal to it, it's probably okay. But if the more you can stick to a clean approach, the cleaner your results will be. I think that's the way to do it. But we'd like people to try and work out how they can keep it going themselves. So, your feedback and honesty is really important on this. And so we said drinks. Are there any foods allowed?
No.
No. All right. Okay.
That's not just dirty. That's getting
really
really grubby. Yes,
fasting.
that's just getting grubby doing it that way.
Okay. And finally, tell us a bit about what happens to our body's metabolism when you fast. What's going on? What's changing?
So basically, you're giving your body a rest. Just like how we sleep, we give our mind a rest and our body. But we need to give our metabolism a rest. And we know that every cell in our body has a internal body clock. And the evidence is really clear in showing that we should feed our bodies in line with the body clock of all of these cells. And food is a really strong signal to these cells' body clocks. And so if we're starting to eat at all hours of the day, which we do now, but we didn't hundreds of years ago, so by eating from early in the morning till late at night, we're really playing around with this body clock and disrupting it. And the reason that's bad is because we know this body clock controls our metabolism and controls so many different areas of our health. And, if we think hundreds of years ago, people didn't eat in the way that they eat now. We now have on average about 6 to 7 eating occasions or eating events throughout the day. So this is about 2 to 3 main meals or 2 to 3 snacks a day. We know that we eat over longer periods as well. And our body clock just wasn't made to handle this. And we need that rest period. We need to have periods of time where our blood sugar, for example, has returned to baseline, our blood fats have returned to baseline. We're not having all of these metabolic stresses going on, initiating things like inflammation, oxidative stress. And we also know that, and Tim, I think you can perhaps pick up on this, that it actually is good for our microbes as well, to give them a rest as well.
Yes, so all the studies have shown that fasting improves the general health of your gut microbes. It allows microbes to come out and start cleaning up your gut and your gut lining and reduces inflammation. So all of these things, metabolic, microbiome, plus we were evolved for millions of years to have a long fasting period, means this is, in theory, a really good thing to do. And I guess what we're trying to do is to say, how does this work in the modern world in practice, so that everyone can learn from this, and we can try and work out how to adapt those ancient evolutionary things of our ancestors into our daily lives now. So thanks everyone for these great questions, really insightful and interesting. Hope you'll all join us on the intermittent fasting study when it goes live in October. Help us gather more scientific information about this through this mass community study. And I think I see this ZOE Health community as a growing thing. Do get other people to join. You don't have to have just done COVID to do this. Anyone can download the app and help us on this journey together to spread the word to friends and family. And if you haven't got the app, you can download it from the App Store or the Google Play Store. So help science, keep logging, and thank you from both of us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.